Discover the unexpected moment a single dad's unexpected act transformed a CEO's life forever. Mike wiped sweat from his brow as he pushed the last car out of the shop's bay. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that mirrored the weight pressing down on his shoulders. A car repair shop in a small Midwestern town wasn't just his job, it was his lifeline. Each turn of the wrench, every grease-stained garment symbolized the sacrifices he made for Emma, his teenage daughter, whose college dreams hung by a thin thread of his dwindling finances. The thought of her potential future, bright and limitless, clashed starkly with the grim reality he faced day in and day out. How could he support her ambitions when they barely scraped by? While Mike grappled with this, Sarah sat in the corner office of her high-rise, gazing past the city skyline that sprawled before her. Her phone buzzed incessantly with reports about unethical practices plaguing her company, her empire. The ambition that once fueled her climb to the top now felt suffocating. Each headline dragged her deeper into despair. She had sacrificed family dinners, personal relationships, and any sense of joy for success on a corporate ladder that now seemed stained with betrayal. The fear of losing everything twisted her stomach, and for the first time she questioned whether it had all been worth it. With mounting pressure from shareholders and a scandal threatening to unravel her carefully constructed world, Sarah sought solace away from the chaos. She booked a retreat in a small town, desperate for clarity. But as fate would have it, her sleek luxury car sputtered and died just outside Mike's shop. Annoyed and frantic, she stepped out, surveying the quaintness of the town around her. The last thing she needed was to rely on someone like him, a mechanic with grease-stained hands. "Can I help you?" Mike's voice pulled her from her judgmental haze. He was instantly struck by her sharp corporate demeanor, but there was something about the weariness beneath the surface of her perfectly pressed suit that caught his eye. As he worked on the car, the conversation flowed in unexpected directions. Mike spoke fondly of Emma, of bake sales at school, and the backyard tent they set up to sell lemonade and cookies. "Every penny counts," he said, his gaze reflecting a warm pride. Sarah, who had once derailed her life in pursuit of numbers and profits, felt an odd connection for him. This man, with his humble job and heartfelt stories, reminded her of values she had long abandoned. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference."
Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Mike's simplicity knocked against her corporate world like a hammer striking metal. He embodied everything she'd cast aside: integrity, familial love, the willingness to work tirelessly for the sake of another. He proposed a coffee, and she found herself saying yes before her mind could catch up with her heart. The tension in her chest twisted tighter. Could she actually view her business decisions through a lens of morality instead of cold calculations? As they shared stories over steaming cups, the anguish inside her swirled. If she brought Mike's perspective back into the office, it could unravel everything she had worked so hard to achieve. But deep down, it felt like a choice she hadn't realized she longed to make. Caught in this whirlwind of newfound perspectives, her phone buzzed on the table, reminding her of looming decisions. Her heart raced as she looked back at Mike, his earnest eyes radiating hope that felt foreign. Could embracing his values help her rediscover a purpose beyond her boardroom battles, or would society's expectations drag her back down, silencing the rhythmic cadence of morality she was just beginning to recognize? As they sat in the cozy cafe, the aroma of coffee enveloped them in a comforting warmth that contrasted sharply with the tumult in Sarah's mind. Mike spoke, unaware of the storm brewing within her. His words were simple but profound, painting a vivid picture of hopes unchained and dreams carved out from hard work and love. She wondered how someone so rooted in modesty could articulate values she had only skimmed over in glossy boardroom presentations. "Every car has a story," he said, wiping his hands on an old rag, "just like people do. Each one deserves care and attention, just like Emma. When I see that shine in her eyes, it makes everything I do worth it." Their conversation drifted, circling back to family and aspirations. Sarah was drawn to Mike's authenticity, but a gnawing fear crept in. What happened when she returned to her world of profit over people? The retweets, the headlines, the insatiable thirst for validation courting her every decision. It felt like a life choreographed by someone else. A silence settled, heavy yet expectant. I could see the flicker of understanding in Mike's eyes, as if he sensed the weight she was juggling. The walls of her corporate life rose in her mind, and I felt trapped under their shadow. "What if," she finally ventured, "what if this," indicating the cafe and the man before her, "is what I've been missing? What if the way I've been leading has been all wrong? Mike leaned in, nodding slowly. Sometimes we get so caught up in the race that we forget the reason we started running in the first place. The truth in his statement pierced through her defenses.
She had climbed the corporate ladder relentlessly, expecting happiness to greet her once she reached the summit. But now she was face to face with the terrifying possibility that success meant very little if it stripped her of connection. As they exchanged ideas, Sarah began to appreciate the contrast of their lives, the power he wielded in his modest shop to change lives with kindness against her own empty, status-driven existence in the skyscraper above. The realization ignited a trembling determination within her. She could harness this moment, this encounter, to reshape her narrative. But how? The urgency of decisions loomed ahead. She had a meeting scheduled in 2 days to discuss her future with the board, a group renowned for prioritizing profit margins over values. If she returned with newfound inspiration from the backroads of life, could she challenge their notions? Could she even contemplate restructuring an organization that thrived on cutthroat ideals? A series of emails pulled her focus, notifications flashing on her phone as if mocking her contemplation. The familiar dread returned, suffocating and relentless. She needed a plan, but the implications of disrupting an empire now felt both thrilling and terrifying. "What's next for you?" Mike asked, breaking her reverie. His genuine curiosity countered her internal chaos. Sarah swallowed her initial response, her stomach churning with uncertainty. "I have decisions to make," she admitted, "and I might need help." The vulnerability trembled in her voice as she recognized that seeking assistance was a strength she had long rejected. For the first time, she felt unburdened by the obligations of her corporate titles. In that small cafe, with the sun dipping lower and shadows lengthening outside, she sensed she could redefine her path. As they finished their coffee, a sudden idea sprang forth. "What if we work together?" she suggested. "You could help me rebuild everything that's wrong with my company's values, and I can help you with whatever it is you need to push Emma forward." Mike raised an eyebrow, taken aback. It was bold, unorthodox, and yet filled with potential. The moment deepened, charged with possibility, as they stood on the brink of a unique alliance that could challenge them both. As Sarah weighed the option in her mind, the implications cascaded into a mix of excitement and dread. But before she could articulate her thoughts further, the ringing of her phone interrupted once more, a reminder of the world waiting for her attention. Faced with the conflicting paths before her, Sarah realized the time for contemplation was fading. "Will you commit to this?" Mike's question hung in the air as she sensed the pivotal choice she was about to make. It could either cement her resolve to change or retreat back into the shadows of her corporate cage. The stakes were higher than ever, and she felt the pull of something greater than herself igniting her courage. As she deliberated on how to answer Mike, she realized her path had transformed, steering her toward a confrontation with her own identity, values, and the daunting office waiting for her return. "Will I?" she replied, her voice steadier than her heart. "The moment of truth is coming." The cafe bustled around them, but within Sarah, noise faded into a dull echo. Her thoughts raced with the gravity of her decision. Working with Mike felt thrilling yet insurmountable. Every possibility seemed laden with a weight she had never felt before. What if she misplaced this opportunity? She had spent years curating her corporate persona, sharp, unyielding, often cold. Now the prospect of collaboration with someone who thrived on warmth and connection both invigorated and terrified her. "Can you trust me?" Mike's earnest gaze pierced through her turmoil. His question flooded her with hesitation. Trust was a currency she had traded too readily in her previous life, often paying dearly. Critics were lurking in the shadows of her corporate realm, eager to exploit her missteps should she falter. But beyond the glistening facade of her current existence lay a yearning for authenticity, a yearning Mike encapsulated effortlessly. "Trust is earned," she murmured, grappling with her answer. The mundane glow of the cafe lights cast shadows of doubt across her mind, yet something deeper nudged her toward a leap of faith. Was this moment meant to be a reclamation? An opportunity to redefine not just her professional life, but her personal conviction? "I understand," he replied, his voice steady, "but sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most profound changes. I see potential in you that you may not fully recognize yet." His belief resonated within her, stirring a flicker of long-buried confidence. What if she wasn't just a cog in a machine? What if she could harness her corporate acumen to influence change, not just for her company, but within herself too? "Let's say," Sarah began cautiously, "I take this step.
I need to make sure that whatever changes I attempt, they align with the financial stability we've built. The board won't tolerate shifts without tangible results. Mike nodded, his expression serious. We could start small, highlight humanity in the data you present, incorporate values into your metrics, show them that true leadership involves measuring impact, not just profit. The vision began to crystallize. She could transmute numbers into narratives, entwining heartfelt stories with statistics. Perhaps this wasn't about dismantling the skyscraper she had built, but instead modifying it to incorporate light, art, and humanity. But looming over her was the reality of her board meeting. Days away, her colleagues clung perilously to profit margins and rewards by any means necessary. Engaging them in a dialogue centered around empathy and connections would be tantamount to swimming against a current.
As she weighed her options, uncertainty rooted itself deeper. What would be their reaction? Would they dismiss her? Would they ridicule her idealism? Sudden visceral fear coursed through her, the thought of humiliation paralyzing. And yet, through the haze of doubt, a resolve began to solidify. If I do this, she said slowly, I'm going to need your guidance. Vulnerability laced her voice. She was not accustomed to asking for help. Absolutely, I'm right here. His promise felt like a grounding force. In that instant, Sarah set aside the corporate armor she so carefully constructed. The thought of standing in front of the board, vulnerable yet empowered, flickered before her. They would have to see not just a leader, but a human being, a person who yearned for connection over cold metrics. As they finished their conversation, Sarah's phone blared to life again, insistent and demanding. The board's persistent messages pulled her back toward her corporate reality, but she felt different somehow, more centered, more resolute. Fumbling through her notifications, she resolved to talk to Mike again, formally crafting their partnership. That urge to escape back into solitude felt distant. So, Mike asked, breaking her reverie again, how do we begin? She met his gaze, her determination coalescing. Let's outline our approach. I need a real plan to present to the board, something I can truly stand behind. As they jotted down ideas, Sarah realized what was missing, her essence. Ideas flowed and transformed into tangible steps, the boundaries of her old and new selves beginning to blur. But the clock was ticking, and with it came the reality that life after this moment of discovery would be thrust into the glaring light of scrutiny. Trusting in the potential for growth was one thing, facing the board's impending judgment was another. Just when it felt this newfound light might dim, a message popped up on her screen, an unexpected email from the board, with an ominous subject line, regarding your upcoming meeting. Apprehension flooded through her. The moment of truth approached, and now there was no turning back. The future loomed before her like a dark door waiting to be opened, and beyond it lay either redemption or the collapse of everything she knew. How would she face them armed with her new ideals against their entrenched values? The time to confront her truth had finally arrived. As Sarah stared at the email notification on her phone, dread pulled in the pit of her stomach. The looming board meeting felt like a shadow swallowing her whole. Regarding your upcoming meeting, the words echoed in her mind, an urgent summons to face a challenge that threatened to unravel everything she hoped to build. Are you all right? Mike asked, catching the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. She forced a smile, trying to mask her apprehension. Just trying to prepare for what's coming. Preparation is key, he replied, his tone encouraging. Remember, you're not alone in this. You have a plan. Let's focus on that. His reassurance offered a thin layer of comfort against the rising tide of doubt. The realization suddenly struck her. This was more than a career crossroads. This was an opportunity to craft her narrative with authenticity, to show her colleagues a side of leadership that had been discarded in pursuit of cutthroat success. She could feel something, an unfamiliar resolve, start to stir within her. Let's break it down, she responded, her voice firmer now. What are the concrete steps we can present? As they dove into strategy, Sarah felt a sense of clarity emerged. They brainstormed ways to weave emotional intelligence into their metrics, emphasizing narrative-driven data that highlighted how individual contributions transformed lives and fostered sustainability. The realization that these discussions could shift the company's trajectory filled her with excitement, even as she felt the weight of risk. Yet the nagging question remained, would her board actually embrace this shift? They had long idolized the hard metrics of growth and profit, so how could she guide them towards measures that included the human element, elements they viewed as inefficiencies? Hours seemed to dissolve as they outlined their proposal, but underneath her focus lay an undercurrent of anxiety. What if she presented her ideas only to face scorn and derision? What if trust slipped through her fingers again, leaving her isolated atop a mountain of ambition? Sarah, Mike interjected, breaking through her spiral. You need to remember why this matters. To you, to the people depending on you. That's your strength. His eyes locked onto hers, willing her to realize her potential.
Your vision can inspire transformation. It's time to show your board you are not just a cog, but a visionary capable of leading change. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of those words settle into the very foundations of her resolve. She thought of the employees who had come to her after losing faith in the system, seeking guidance. "What if I fail them?" she whispered, the words spilling out before she could harness them. "Failure is part of growth," Mike replied. "You're reshaping not just your career, but the culture within your organization. If you can't be true to yourself, how will they ever feel inspired to follow you?" His perspective was like a lighthouse cutting through the fog. Inspired, Sarah scribbled furiously, capturing insights that danced in her mind. "We need to establish emotional touchpoints in our metrics. If they can see how their contributions affect people's lives." "Exactly," Mike encouraged. "When they witness that impact firsthand, they're more likely to embrace change as a collective." A moment of stillness enveloped them as reality set in. For the first time, Sarah envisioned the boardroom not as a battleground, but as a platform for dialogue, a space for sharing.
The thought of standing there, vulnerable yet determined, brought a thrill that overshadowed her fear. Slowly, she began drafting her introduction for the meeting, recognizing that her words would be the bridge between the human experience and cold, hard numbers. Yet, deep within her, an unsettling thought lingered as she clicked send on the final proposal. What if they couldn't see the vision she now held so clearly? Would they welcome her new ideals, or would they reject her, just as she feared they would? A text from Mike flashed across her screen. "Feeling good about this?" She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, but the unease coiled tighter in her stomach, twisting and turning, an omen that the upcoming confrontation was all but unavoidable. But a fire ignited within her. "Whatever happens, I'm ready. Time to face my truth." As the anticipation gripped her, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was transformed, no longer merely a pale corporate shade of herself, but rather a vibrant blend of strength and vulnerability. The battle ahead loomed, but with it came a newfound strength she hadn't known she possessed. And as the clock ticked closer to the meeting, a faint but persistent whisper echoed in her mind. Would this moment be the catalyst for both her professional rebirth and personal reclamation? The answer awaited her in the boardroom, a place where she would either solidify her transformation or find herself at a precipice, forced to confront the choice between safety and authenticity. As Sarah stood outside the polished glass doors of the boardroom, time seemed to stretch, each second laden with possibility. The air was thick with anticipation, a charged atmosphere that mirrored her turbulent emotions. She placed her hand on the doorknob, hesitating for just a heartbeat, feeling the cool metal against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from her resolve. This was no longer just a meeting. It was a declaration of her intent to lead with integrity, guided by the experiences and stories she had gathered from the people around her. With a deep breath, she turned the knob and stepped inside, her heels clicking against the sleek floor. 7 pairs of eyes turned to her, some expectant, others skeptical. She caught a glimpse of Owen, the finance director, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed defensively. Her stomach twisted into knots. The unlikely ally she had hoped for now felt like a distant memory in this moment of stark reality. Still, she pressed on. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady despite the tumult within. "I'm excited to present a new vision for our metrics, one that embraces both human impact and financial growth." The room was silent, not a single nod of encouragement or sign of interest from her colleagues. The weight of their expectations threatened to crush her spirit. But as she glanced at their faces, I saw the flicker of their humanity. Beneath the polished exterior lay individuals driven by their own ambitions and struggles. This thought ignited a flare of confidence within her. Sarah started with the stats, hard numbers that showcased recent successes, but she paired them with personal stories. "Consider Emily from our customer support team," she said, her voice rising. "Last month, she stayed late to resolve a client's issue, one they had been wrestling with for weeks. By the end of her call, the client was in tears of gratitude. The financial implication is direct, but the emotional connection we foster, this is what our clients remember." Owen shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. "But we need to focus on efficiency, on scale. One story won't change the bottom line." Edging on resilience, she leaned in. "And yet it might. Emily's approach offers a blueprint. If we instill emotional intelligence into our operations, we can maintain productivity while fostering loyalty, an asset no CEO can afford to overlook. It's a shift towards sustainable growth." As she felt the room's energy shift, her heartbeat raced. Was there acceptance in the air? The next moments felt like a tightrope walk, each word a careful step. She laid out her ideas, metrics that integrated qualitative data with quantitative analysis.
It was a bold strategy that challenged their entrenched views, but she stood firm, her belief in the concept surplus of courage. The discussions that followed were punctuated by hesitance and skepticism. Questions arose, sometimes sharp, sometimes thoughtful. "How do we measure emotional impact?" asked Claire, the operations manager, her tone skeptical but not dismissive. "By exploring feedback mechanisms and internal surveys, we create layers of understanding, layers that reveal the human side of our work," she replied, her heart pounding. She sensed the tension, but it wasn't solely opposition. There was intrigue as well, threads of curiosity woven into the fabric of their traditional mindset. Yet amid the commotion of ideas, a shackle of doubt still held her. What if the board never bought into this vision? What if deep down they only understood numbers, not narratives? It was a tighter bind than any she had faced before. For the first time in her career, she wasn't just advocating for a project. She was, in essence, fighting for her authentic self. Then, in an unexpected moment, Owen stood up, his voice interrupting her train of thought. "You're taking a risk, Sarah, but there's strength in vulnerability too. We can't ignore the human aspect of our work just for numbers." The needle in the room shifted. It was a lifeline. Sarah locked eyes with him, realizing that his willingness to engage might sway others. The conversation began to swirl and navigate, exploring her ideas with a vigor she hadn't anticipated. But amidst their burgeoning excitement, Sarah felt the reality of her earlier fears knot tighter.
If the momentum momentarily waned, would she still be able to maintain their interest in the human side of leadership? As the discussion carried her from the edges of doubt into the heart of opportunity, her thoughts raced. Could these moments of collective introspection lead to the transformation she envisioned? The answer hinged not only on her insights, but on the hearts of her colleagues. With the first steps of support unfolding before her, the air crackled with potential. But just as hope began to swell, a familiar voice broke through the hopeful din, stating plainly, "This is great in theory, but can we really afford to change everything?" The question loomed larger than any previous doubt. Sarah was at a crossroads, the weight of every word echoing the tension of her own internal struggle. Could she convince them to walk into a future built on understanding, not just figures? And would her vision resonate deeply enough to create lasting change? The moment wasn't merely about presentations or proposals. It was a battle for hearts and minds she could never have anticipated. The stakes had never been higher. Would she emerge triumphantly transformed in the face of these challenges, or would doubt consume the very vision she fought to embrace? The silence that enveloped the boardroom clung to Sarah's skin like a heavy shroud, thickening the atmosphere she had only begun to pierce. Suddenly, the weight of her insecurities threatened to pour back into her mind, an unwelcome tide. Could she stand against the skepticism surfacing before her and the doubts that silently asked, what if this moment unraveled all she had fought for? The question of change lingered in the air, almost taunting. Sarah found herself staring at the wall beyond the board members, willing an answer to materialize from the abstract. "Can we afford to change everything?" echoed in her head, a refrain she couldn't shake. Yet she had already taken the first step toward a new dialogue. Drawing a deep, grounding breath, she turned her gaze back to the room, determined to fight for her vision. "We can't afford not to change," she asserted, her conviction rising like a wave. "The market is shifting, and our clients demand more than just statistics. They want to feel valued. They want their stories acknowledged. If we ignore that, we're simply inviting our own obsolescence." Owen's expression shifted slightly, shifting gears from defense to consideration. Taking his lead, Sarah redirected her approach, appealing not only to their intellect but their emotions. "What about the future of our company? It's not only driven by numbers, it thrives on relationships. Picture a company where each employee feels invested in their role. This isn't merely idealistic," she continued, her voice now laced with sincerity. "It's practical, and it starts with us valuing each other first." She watched as her colleagues squirmed in their seats, some beginning to nod, others caught in introspection. A flicker of courage surged through her. Their reluctance might shift with deeper engagement, but she needed to extend that lifeline once more. "Let me show you something personal," Sarah suggested, pulling a small notebook from her bag. It was filled with anecdotes, real stories from their colleagues, quotes about their passion and commitment. These are not just numbers. They reflect who we are as a team. They embody our heart, our commitment to each other and our clients. We can harness this energy to transform our metrics. It all loops back to emotional investment.
As she flipped through pages, she recounted tales that underscored resilience, commitment, and the very essence of their work culture. She spoke about late nights spent resolving issues, the joy of celebrating team successes, and the gratitude expressed by clients. With every word, she felt the room warm, slowly thawing the ice of skepticism that had solidified when she began. And yet doubt stalked her, an insidious whisper creeping in. Would it be enough? She couldn't deny that these anecdotes might capture attention temporarily, but what would contingency plans look like? What processes could safeguard her vision against short-term failures? It was essential to back her narratives with structural changes, but was she ready for that complexity? Taking careful notes of her colleagues' reactions, Sarah realized a shift was occurring. Their body language began to lean toward her. Their eyes widened. Nodding heads replaced skeptical frowns. Maybe Owen's previous support had fortified her argument. Maybe her vulnerability had resonated. "We could initiate pilot programs," Claire interjected, a newfound glimmer of enthusiasm in her voice. "Leverage some KPIs focused on qualitative feedback. If it works, remarkably, we scale." Encouraged by this open dialogue, Sarah's strategy shifted. She needed to inspire collaborative thinking, laying the groundwork where everyone felt they had a stake in the development. Exactly. And we can tie these metrics back to our directive goals, showing a clear line from human touch to benefit-driven success. But just as the conversation pivoted toward possibility, uncertainty clawed back, as a voice interrupted, one she hadn't anticipated, the firm and steady tone of the CEO, Jack. "Sarah, I value what you're proposing," he began, and the room fell silent, anticipation hanging in the air like fog. What if we're unable to pivot fast enough? What if industry changes render our efforts moot before we see results? Every eye turned toward her, the implication hanging heavy. The challenge was clear. Could she assure them not just of new ideals, but of the tangible impact of her vision? She felt the pressure of all that she stood to lose, but also a fire igniting within her, a resolve she hadn't fully realized until now. "Jack, the nurturing aspect isn't just about quick wins. It's a long-term investment. We create brand advocates rather than mere customers."
We can start measuring these human elements to reveal their influence on retention, loyalty, and revenue, Sarah countered, her voice steady despite the tremors of uncertainty shaking her core. As the discussion metamorphosed into strategic brainstorming, she caught Owen's eye again. His nod seemed to validate her assertion. Perhaps she'd carved a space for real dialogue to flourish amidst the skeptics. The meeting progressed, a whirlwind of ideas and projections, yet Sarah was all too aware of the threads unraveling into the unknown. With each passing moment, the stakes heightened, coiling tighter around her ambitions. What would the culmination of these conversations mean for her journey? Or could this simply be a fleeting moment on the path to a larger, unmanipulated destiny? As the meeting drew to a close, a gripping thought pierced through the myriad of possibilities swirling in her mind. Bringing change was one thing, ensuring it took root was another entirely. Could she transform not only her career, but the very foundation on which her organization existed? With the weight of these questions pressing against her heart, a new realization settled deep within Sarah. To lead effectively would require leveraging her authenticity, urging others to step beyond their comfort zones. But could she balance that with the sharp realities painted by the numbers? The discussion had opened doors, but the truth loomed like a specter just beyond. They had yet to breach the core of what it meant to lead with heart in a world governed by profits. As Sarah prepared to leave the boardroom, she looked at her colleagues, an array of thoughtful faces reflecting back at her. The moment felt both perilous and exhilarating, hinting at an evolution yet to materialize. But that was just the beginning, wasn't it? The real challenge lay ahead, a formidable amalgam of complexity and ambition, where the intersection of empathy and performance would meet. Would she seize it, or let fear dictate her next move? As Sarah stepped out of the boardroom, a blend of adrenaline and apprehension coursed through her veins. The air felt charged, not only with the outcome of the meeting, but with the implications of her newfound resolve. She had placed herself at the forefront of a potential transformation, but the weight of uncertainty loomed large. Navigating the bustling office corridors, thoughts crashed against one another like waves. What if she had overstepped? What if the vulnerability she displayed was perceived as weakness? Each step echoed with questions, yet there was also a whisper of determination urging her forward. She could not retreat now. Failure felt like an untenable option. As she approached her desk, Sarah observed the spirited exchange between her team members. They were animated, their faces lit up with restored enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the skeptical expressions from earlier.
Perhaps there was promise in the change she proposed, an inkling of hope that her vision might resonate. But would it last? She sank into her chair, the pulse of the day still ticking away, and opened her notebook again. The anecdotes she had shared seemed to pulse with possibility. What if she transformed not merely her department, but the entire company culture?
She snagged a few pages, feeling their weight like a talisman against self-doubt. Her thoughts drifted to Claire's idea, a pilot program focused on qualitative metrics. That suggestion felt serendipitous, a crack in the dam of resistance. It ignited her imagination. What if they structured workshops around the stories she had shared? Engaging employees in recognizing their potential and fostering an environment of belonging could generate remarkable outcomes. Yet how could she engineer that growth without abandoning structure? The hours slipped away as she toyed with strategies and contingency plans. She drafted outlines for approaches, envisioning interactive sessions. What would it require to engage her colleagues in a way that brought them on board, their buy-in transforming from obligation to passion? The quandary circled back to the heart of leadership. A brief lull in her thoughts was broken by a knock at the door. It was Owen, his brows furrowed but his expression open to discussion. "Can we talk?" he asked, and there was an urgency in his voice that instantly captured her attention. "Of course." Sarah gestured for him to sit, her stomach nodding with anticipation. Was this a follow-up to her pitch or a critique of her overreach? Owen leaned forward, his intensity palpable. "I just wanted to say you really brought something new to the table today. I was skeptical at first, but you framed things in a way that caught me thinking." He paused, the edges of his mouth lifting slightly. "But I'd like to know what you're really aiming for. What's the endgame here?" His question hit harder than she anticipated. There was a choice before her. Should she lean into the open vulnerability she had shown in the boardroom, or maintain a composed facade for safety? Deciding to embrace authenticity, she spoke from the heart. "I want us to evolve into a culture where everyone feels valued, where empathy drives our actions. I believe that's the foundation for real success. Not just numbers, but real, tangible connections." He nodded, seemingly contemplating her words. "That's powerful, but it means taking risks. Are you ready for that?" An urgent flutter erupted in her chest. Yes, this path was wrought with uncertainty, yet she knew these shifts were essential for both her growth and the company's survival. "I think it's time we embrace vulnerability a little more," she admitted quietly. "But I need your help, and perhaps even others who share this vision. I can't drive this alone." Owen leaned back, assessing her. "I'm on board if you're willing to refine the framework."
Let's create something that anchors our approach rather than casts it adrift. Relief swept through her, but the weightiness of anticipation settled in. They discussed strategies, brainstorming creative solutions, and building a coalition of like-minded supporters within the firm. It was invigorating and daunting all at once. When they finally concluded their discussion, Sarah felt a shift, not just in momentum, but in purpose. They were outlining the narrative together, stacking bricks towards their shared vision of progression. The path to success lay not just in her hands, but in a network of compassion and collaboration she was beginning to cultivate. Yet, as the day dwindled, Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing fear that clung to her. She realized that for all the camaraderie they were building, she had yet to confront the deeper resistance from those anchored in tradition. How would she face the factions within the company that resisted change as they clung to the familiar? Stepping into her car that evening, shadows danced with uncertainty and ambition alike. She was poised on the brink of a transformative journey, but the challenge ahead felt more profound than she had anticipated. Would she have the fortitude to confront the naysayers and make her vision a reality? A breath caught in her throat as she grasped the steering wheel. She would need to harness her strength to not only inspire, but also confront the old guard head-on. The time had come to face those who wouldn't welcome change. Resolute, Sarah drove into the night, the glow of the city ahead mirroring the burning resolve within her to redefine herself and everything she believed in. As dawn broke over the city, the light streaming through Sarah's window felt almost surreal, casting an ethereal pall that contrasted with the turmoil she felt within. She had hardly slept, her mind racing as she envisioned the confrontation ahead. Those who resisted change were not merely hurdles, they were dragons to slay, talismans of tradition looming over her ambitions. As she prepared for the day, she tightened her grip around the coffee mug, drawing strength from its warmth. At work, the atmosphere buzzed with the hum of productivity, but Sarah sensed an undercurrent of tension. It was as if the office itself held its breath, awaiting her next move. She entered the meeting room, a space that had transformed from an arena of skepticism into a crucible for ideas. It was time to catalyze the energy she'd amassed and turn it into something formidable. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, and as the team filed in, she noted the varied expressions: anticipation, skepticism, curiosity. Each face was a canvas, and today she needed to paint a picture of potential. She began with what had sparked her passion, the stories. "I want to reclaim our narrative," Sarah stated, attempting to weave her vision of transformation into a tapestry that would connect them all. As she spoke about fostering empathy and collaboration, she noticed Owen nodding. his warmth radiating encouragement. But behind the excited murmurs, a few faces were stony, set against anything that threatened the status quo. Robert, the finance director, sat with crossed arms, his eyes narrowed, a fortress of resistance. "This all sounds great, but what about profits? Isn't that our primary goal?" he interjected, his voice cutting through the budding enthusiasm like a cold wind. For a moment, Sarah faltered. The question was valid, reckless even, given the tight economic conditions they faced. Yet defensive answers would only heighten the divide. Instead, she drew on her own experiences, echoing the vulnerability she had advocated. "I believe that when we invest in our people, we elevate our profits. It's not an either-or situation. Empathy can drive productivity. Creativity flourishes in environments where people feel valued. Our success is intertwined with our culture." The room shifted. Some hesitated, absorbing the impact of her words. Owen leaned forward, emboldened by her conviction. What Sarah is proposing isn't just about changing how we interact, but revolutionizing how we define success. Metrics will follow. Sarah sensed the ripple effect of their collaboration, a burgeoning alliance strengthening against the steadfast naysayers. Yet Robert's skepticism loomed. "We need numbers, data. What's the proof this will work?" he challenged, his skepticism feeling like an anchor. In that moment, her breath hitched. Sarah understood deep in her gut that this was the crossroads. She could respond with anger, defensive rhetoric, drown him out with the flood of her emotions. Or she could stand firm, not against him, but alongside him. "You're right, Robert. We need to back this with measurable results," she replied calmly, digesting her own fears. "Perhaps we can run a pilot program, track processes and impacts. Let's see the data together and use it to guide our way." His brow furrowed, but something shifted in the air. It was a step toward bridging their divide, and though the road ahead felt uncertain, the prospects glimmered like distant stars on the horizon. Throughout the meeting, Sarah felt a rising tide of confidence, a wave fueled by purpose and collaboration. Each voice contributed to the evolving vision, and as they brainstormed potential approaches and metrics, she could see resistance soften, if only slightly. As planning wrapped up, a sense of hope infused the room. Yet she knew the war was far from over. The deeper challenges lurked beneath the surface, where some remained entrenched. After the team dispersed, Sarah's heart raced with the limitations of their success. Her focus must now shift to those who stood beyond whispers of change. Returning to her desk, she noticed an email from Claire, positive feedback about potential allies in the HR department. With excitement clawing at her chest, Sarah pondered her next move. Engaging HR felt vital for garnering broader support, yet she couldn't ignore the lurking shadows of conflict that awaited. The resolve to confront those deeply entrenched in tradition flickered within her, a flame both terrifying and exhilarating. Could she rally others to be brave alongside her as she prepared to face the staunchest of opponents? With a steely breath, Sarah began drafting a strategic outreach email, her fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard. Today was a step, but tomorrow promised an uphill battle. The real confrontation lay ahead. Her heart thudded in anticipation as she hit send. Nothing would ever change if she didn't dare challenge the giants hiding in the dark. And as Sarah looked out at the city bathed in sunlight, she realized the question now was not whether change would come, but how fiercely she would pursue it. The stakes had risen, and the game was afoot. Would she have what it took to navigate the treacherous waters ahead? As the day unfolded, a new intensity permeated Sarah's thoughts. She could feel the excitement coiling within her, yet an undercurrent of uncertainty threatened to pull her down. Engaging with HR could open doors, but it also risked exposing her vulnerability. Would they see her as a visionary or a disruptor? The boundary between empowerment and chaos was razor thin. Upon entering the HR office the next morning, she was greeted by Claire's warm smile, a beacon amidst her swirling doubts. Claire had carved a reputation for being a mediator, gifted at forging connections and understanding the rhythms of office dynamics. "Sarah, so good to see you," Claire said, her voice an anchor of calm in the storm. "Thanks for your feedback on my ideas," Sarah replied, keenly aware of the reactions that still echoed in her mind from the meeting. "I'm hoping to discuss ways we can align HR's strengths with our team's vision. I believe we could make a significant impact if we combine our efforts." As Sarah spoke, she noticed how Claire leaned forward, genuinely interested. Her enthusiasm felt contagious. They exchanged ideas, and a burgeoning strategy began to take shape, one that might address both the cultural shift Sarah envisioned and the metrics Robert insisted upon. But as the conversation progressed, doubts crept in. What if Claire became another obstacle? Sarah's mind raced. She had to ensure her ambition didn't alienate potential allies. The challenging intricacies of collaboration loomed larger than anticipated.
Just then, a knock at the door interrupted them. In walked Robert, his expression a storm of curiosity and skepticism. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, eyes darting between the two women. "I heard you were discussing the cultural initiatives." "Actually, we were brainstorming ways to intersect HR capabilities with our future goals," Sarah initiated, carefully sculpting her words to remain inviting yet assertive. He hesitated but stepped further into the room, curiosity peaking.
"Let's see what you've got," he said, crossing his arms. The air thickened as Sarah felt the weight of his presence. The confrontation she had been anticipating arrived prematurely, with Robert symbolizing the old guard that resisted any transformative ideas. "We're considering a pilot program that focuses on cultural development alongside our financial metrics," she explained, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "Interesting concept, but how do you plan to measure the immediate impact?" His tone was guarded, yet she noted a flicker of interest in his eyes. That flicker ignited a spark of audacity within her. "It's simple, really," she responded, suddenly invigorated by the moment. "We will set clear success metrics using both performance data and employee feedback, creating a feedback loop that benefits everyone. If we nurture growth in our teams, we'll see the results reflected in our profits." Robert leaned back slightly, still skeptical, but at least willing to engage. Claire watched the exchange, her presence solidifying the partnership Sarah envisioned. They discussed approaches, metrics, potential pitfalls, and the need for a phased rollout that might ease Robert's concerns. But beneath the surface, apprehension lingered. Would they maintain this momentum when she stepped out of the room? The conflict between creating her ideal work culture and ensuring financial viability gnawed at her. As their brainstorming continued, Sarah felt her confidence heightened, an empowering awareness that she wasn't merely fighting an uphill battle, she was shaping a narrative around collaboration and understanding. Each point made was a triumph over her fear, but with each small victory arose the uncertainty of future resistance. When the meeting concluded, Sarah left the room still aware of the lingering tension, but now more determined. She understood that this moment wasn't just a victory, it was preparing her for the bigger challenges, the ones looming beyond Robert, the deeper entrenched issues that lay buried within the organization's culture. Before she could leave, Claire called out to her, "Sarah, you're doing great. You're getting through to them. Just remember that you need to build this bridge steadily." Her encouragement felt like a lifeline. As Sarah looked over her notes, plotting the next steps, she felt a pulse of anticipation bordering on anxiety. Every engagement, every word exchanged, could tighten the noose of pressure around her ambitions or unleash them into something extraordinary. The stakes were continually rising. Could she leverage this momentum and confront the deep-rooted traditions that resisted change? Breathing deeply, Sarah steeled herself, understanding now that these small encounters were mere preambles to the true confrontation lying ahead. What would happen when she finally faced everyone who had decided the status quo was non-negotiable? Each encounter beckoned, and she was resolute. Change wasn't just a necessary journey, it was a globe on which she spun her fate. As the office lights dimmed after a long day, Sarah's heart raced with anticipation of the uncertain path ahead. She could feel the dragons waiting to be confronted. Would they ignite her passions or extinguish her dreams? Only time would tell, but she would not cower. The battle was sharpening, and so was her resolve. In the weeks that followed, Sarah transformed her department through a courageous blend of empathy and professionalism, gradually breaking down the barriers that had long stood between her vision and the reality of her company's corporate culture. The pilot program she initiated, which combined emotional intelligence with traditional metrics, had initially been met with skepticism, but now showed promising data indicating increased employee satisfaction and engagement. Walking into the office one morning, Sarah felt a profound sense of belonging. The vibrant energy that buzzed through the workspace was infectious. Conversations around her were now peppered with animated discussions about their shared goals, and positive results were being thrown into the mix. Stories of individual employee contributions were not just anecdotes anymore. They became celebrated victories, chaque mention reinforcing her vision of a workplace ethos rooted in authenticity and connection. However, she understood that her greatest challenge lay ahead. The board meeting was approaching, a critical focal point that would dictate not only her future, but the trajectory of the entire organization. She reviewed the data, prepared her presentation, and practiced her approach like an athlete before a championship, desperate to seize the moment against formidable opposition. As she stood outside the boardroom, waiting for the meeting to commence, the weight of her journey hung heavy. This moment was her crucible. She had fought her battles, transformed her department, and yet skepticism still lingered in the minds of the deeper entrenched board members who perpetually prioritized profit over principles. The moment arrived, and as she entered,
The room was stark with tension. The same 7 pairs of critical eyes stared back at her, but now she wasn't just the CEO looking for validation. She was a champion for change, armed with stories of transformation, resilient data, and the backing of a mobilized team eager for change. "Thank you all for gathering today," she began, the steadiness of her voice ringing against the stark walls. She understood their doubts and met them that day not as an adversary, but as a partner, intent on guiding them toward an integrated identity that married financial success with human-driven narratives. She shared stories from the pilot program, showcasing emotional examples alongside the statistical successes that demonstrated a collective impact.
Each figure you see before you is tied directly to the changing narrative of our workplace, she asserted, presenting her data with confidence. Through this program, we have increased employee retention by 15%, improved satisfaction scores by 20%, and fostered a culture where people feel valued. Robert's skeptical eyes seemed to narrow, but the flicker of emerging intrigue was unmistakable. "People are not just resources," she continued, the rhythm of her delivery becoming more emphatic. "They are our greatest assets and unique storytellers. By nurturing their skills and emotional intelligence, we drive profitability without sacrificing our values." This paradox hasn't been explored here, but it's one that can set us apart in the industry, she concluded, brushing aside the insecurities that had shrouded her during their last conversations. The room buzzed with whispers, curiosity, intrigue, a quiet awakening as she laid out the next steps for full implementation. Support blossomed where doubt once reigned, and she saw the shift beginning to take root. When Owen stood, validating her proposal and suggesting they adopt her methods organization-wide, she couldn't help but feel a rush of gratitude. The pieces were starting to align, her vision taking shape. And yet, it was the realization of potential that defined this moment. She wasn't just impacting numbers, she was embodying transformation. After a lengthy discussion, the board voted unanimously, entrusting Sarah's ideas to pilot through every department. Recognition swept through the room, and she felt as if she had crossed an unseen barrier, the apprehension of her former self falling away, replaced by a newfound authority grounded in compassion. As she emerged from the boardroom, elation coursing through her, Sarah reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. She had embraced vulnerability, engaged in authentic dialogue, and ultimately conquered the fear that had threatened her ambitions. Days turned into weeks as the company's culture shifted. Employees engaged more deeply, sharing stories that illuminated their values and transformed the corporate landscape they operated in. Sarah observed how the emotional investments were reflected in the financial metrics, solidifying her belief that integrity and compassion could indeed coexist with profitability. Standing amidst her team one afternoon, hearing them discuss their aspirations, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was not just about her overcoming challenges. It was about building a legacy where empathy and success were intertwined, and she was proud to pave that path. In the quiet moments, beneath the weight of accomplishment, she embraced the person she had become, confident, competent, and unwavering in purpose. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was equipped with the tools, the community, and the transforming power of shared human experience. Sarah had become an architect of change, and she was ready to challenge and redefine the narrative wherever her journey led her next. This call to action amplified loudly within her. She would navigate the future boldly, a steward of a new approach born from authentic connection and relentless ambition. She now understood that success was not a solitary achievement, but a shared experience, an enduring commitment to excellence fueled by humanity. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment their reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion.